on the show today, Lindsey Lockett. So she is trauma educator, nervous system coach, does interesting things. Lindsey, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Thanks.
Well, sometimes I begin my podcast these days by saying, what deep childhood and existential trauma got you interested in what you do now? Now, without oversharing all the details, I imagine there was something kind of early years that got you interested in this.
Yeah, a little bit for sure. Didn't realize that it was stuff from my early years until I had a dark night of the soul 4 years ago, and all the things that I had not felt or acknowledged or processed or integrated just sort of like was thrust in front of my face, and I had no choice but to deal with them. So the short version of my story is raised in a home with a narcissistic, abusive stepfather and a codependent, passive-aggressive mother. Also raised in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity in the Bible Belt in the South.
In the States, yeah. We have less of that in the UK, though.
Yes.
The Bible Belt in Europe is one in Holland. There's one in the Netherlands called the Bible Belt. But,
yeah, this is like the Trump Make America Great Again, bring back the traditional Christian family values. The Bible is the literal word of God. Your body is sinful, like that sort of indoctrination. And what's ironic is that because of the dysfunction of my home, I actually found some safety and certainty in the church, and didn't realize until I was 30 that the church was also a source of unsafety and dysregulation. And there was a lot of brainwashing and indoctrination. And I've been out for 8 years, but to this day, I'm still uncovering sort of like ways that the little tentacles of the tumor haven't been cut out yet, I guess.
We talk about the religious side because I was brought up sort of liberal Catholic, but in a very kind of liberal way. And a lot of people in the UK and Germany and places that listen to this are pretty secular. But I know we also have a lot of listeners in more countries where religion really has a hold, in the Arabic world and parts of the States, and that sort of fundamentalism, which I don't know much about, but it does seem like it could be a pretty oppressive force for someone.
I mean, it is a cult. Like I fully believe and maintain that evangelical Christianity is the largest, most widely accepted cult in the world.
It's funny, isn't it, that once a cult gets beyond a certain size, it's now a religion.
Right.
But actually, if you were just like, even Catholicism, you just had stuff about drinking blood and stuff like that. You'd be thinking about it, going, what are you talking about, man? That's crazy. Like, we take the children and we splash water on them, and then we, like if you just took it out of context, and this is certainly true in many parts of the world still, that there's a literalism to certain religions, right? Because religions evolve. Religions like Judaism comes in different flavors. British Christianity, by the way, is generally left-leaning, not conservative.
Yeah.
And so, but there's a sort of evolution there, and in those fundamentalist or evangelical forms, let's just spell it out. What's unhealthy about that from a trauma point of view? Because we might disagree with it, right? You might go, "Hey, I'm an atheist," but that's not traumatizing. That's just disagreement. Yeah. What's traumatizing about those cults?
Okay, so many things, and I'm speaking specifically to like fundamentalist, evangelical, Southern American Christianity.
Right.
Because it is like, I live in Minnesota now. I grew up in Texas. Christianity in Minnesota is not the same Christianity as what I grew up with in Texas. So I think it's really important to spell that out. It tends to be a lot more liberal in the northern states, and in the southern states, it's very, very conservative. So some things that are traumatizing about it are, I grew up in the 90s, and the pervasive belief in Southern Christianity at that time was something known as purity culture. It's now called the purity movement.
I've heard of it, like the weird stuff with the dads and the silver rings and shit. Like, kind of creepy.
Yeah, it's all about, it places really high emphasis on virginity, especially for girls.
Yeah.
It's all about like wearing white on your wedding day and being pure and being a virgin when you're married. And, I was told that if I wasn't a virgin when I was married, that it was like my husband was marrying a piece of gum that had been chewed up and spit out.
Oh my God. So the body is dirty. And this is true, I know, of in many Islamic countries. For some reason, you're not allowed to say that. I never understood why. Like I would put, all religions that have this in the same category. in some traditional Jewish, traditional Judaism, there might be some sense like sex is sinful or it's dirty. Yes. I think less so in Judaism, but so that's like if you have sexual desire, you're kind of a bad person, right? Like that's the disconnect.
Yeah, I signed what's called a purity pledge whenever I was 12 years old. So I had no education about my anatomy, my body, but it was basically like I signed a contract promising God and my parents that I would remain pure until I was married. I wouldn't think about sex, talk about sex, participate in any kind of sexual activity. I wouldn't lust after boys. I wouldn't touch myself. Like all of that was off limits. And the promise was, if you do all of these things, then when you get married, you're going to have the best sex of your life. Your marriage is going to be amazing. And all of these promises that you're waiting for are going to happen if you save yourself for marriage. And what they don't tell you is that when you're told your whole life that your body is wrong, your desires are wrong, your curiosities are bad, sex is dirty, don't think about it, don't talk about it, don't participate in it. Like the switch doesn't flip the day you get married. And suddenly you're like, oh, now everything's fine.
Now it's cool. Pass me that penis or whatever. It's not going to be the way.
Yeah. So the sexual trauma was definitely a piece of it. I mean, another piece of the trauma was there's a lot of Bible verses, like Bible verse memorization was a big part of my upbringing, and believing that the Bible is the literal word of God. So like I literally believed that creation happened in 7 days. I literally believed that the story of
six. Come on.
Right. I'm sorry. Thank you. Resting on the seventh day. I literally believed that the story of Noah and the ark was factually true. I believed that Jonah was swallowed by a big fish and spit out, and that was factually true. And then you're also told, like, if you question this, your doubt is a sign of your sin, and your doubt is a sign that the devil has like a foothold in your life and you're deceived. And so it's very much like you're not allowed to think for yourself. You're not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed to think critically. This is the truth, and you have to believe all of it. And if you question it, then you're the one who's bad.
And it is crazy making when we can't question the obvious. And I'm actually seeing this sort of on both sides of the political spectrum now.
Right.
The woke left also say there's, diversity good. And, the World Cup's in Qatar at the moment. They have a horrible human rights record. And there's this sense like, well, we shouldn't bring that up. And, certain things aren't allowed to be said. And that's also, it's whether it comes from the left or the fundamentalist religion, like to not allow people to be in touch with reality. Because logic and reality, like to not say, hey, this doesn't, all the animals in a fucking boat, really? How did genetically, there's just two of them, so they're fucking their brothers, the next generation. How does that, like...
Oh, yeah, you don't even think about stuff like that because it's just shoved down your throat. And then another piece that I want to add that is traumatic as well is that there's a Bible verse in Jeremiah that says, the heart is wicked above all things and should not be trusted. And so what does that tell you? Like what my heart wants, what my intuition says, I can't trust it. And so it disconnects you from your body, from the wisdom of your body. So yeah, that's just 3 ways that it was traumatizing. I could keep going, but...
so the key thing, because I'm learning here and I learn the conversation, I hope you don't mind that. The key thing here is that it's not just sort of, abuse cases like in the Catholic Church, right? Like sexual abuse cases, which, tend to happen in these hierarchical organizations where, priests are trusted very highly and kids are brainwashed to believe what they're told and do what they're told. So it does open up to that kind of abuse, but there's also the kind of disconnect from the body is sinful, sex is bad, and the disconnect from reality of you have to believe this, let's be honest, frankly, stupid stuff.
And don't trust your intuition.
And don't trust yourself. Don't trust your gut. Don't trust your heart. That's all that. And isn't there this idea that's a little bit crazy making, like the devil's inside you, right? You know what? Like, and again, from a British point of view, like I had one Christian friend who wasn't allowed to have sex before marriage, and we all thought she was really weird, and her boyfriend was really unfortunate, right? Yeah. If you're out there, Sarah, I hope you've moved on.
It's very sad.
So, but that was one. So excuse my slightly kind of like, I'm fascinated by this. And I guess this is large numbers of people. Like, are these people who are coming to you as clients? Are these people that
Millions. I mean, everyone that I knew growing up, like, I didn't know anyone who didn't believe in this. So like, it wasn't just that I was like going to some weird, small church where we believed these very strange things. Like, this was the water I was swimming in culturally as well. So I didn't know an atheist. The people that I knew that believed differently than me were like a handful of people, and they were Mormon, which is also very fundamentalist and has very similar belief structures around the Bible and sin and sexual purity and all of that. It's just what they believe about heaven, and Joseph Smith and all that is the difference. But I do work with a lot of people with religious trauma, and it's very much like you get handed this like ball of knotted up thread, and you are like picking the threads apart like one at a time. And it's very tedious and it takes a long time. And I'm light years ahead of where I was, but I also feel like, especially in terms of like my sexuality, I still have light years to go, to be honest.
So I'm guessing at a certain point, what happened? You move away to college, get corrupted by the sinners. You just had like a wake up. What was the?
No, it wasn't until I was 30. I actually grew up and married a pastor, and I was a pastor's wife for 12 years. And so I was in it. I was raising my children away from the secular world. I didn't want them corrupted by the secular world. And so we homeschooled them in a very Christian conservative way. My husband was in full-time ministry, and we led worship together for 12 years. And it wasn't until 2014 that my homeschool children were taking a nap that afternoon, and I sat down to fold some laundry and decided to turn on Netflix, found a documentary called The Bible Tells Me So. Truly believed that documentary was going to support what I believed. It turned out to be the opposite. The documentary, I don't believe it's on Netflix anymore, but the documentary was essentially like about the like homosexual ministers in the like Lutheran and Episcopalian churches, and like how the Bible had been twisted and misinterpreted to create this homophobia in Christianity. And I can tell you that when I sat down to watch that documentary, I was 100% homophobic. I believed that homosexuality was an abomination, that it was a sin. I believed in praying for people to come out of homosexuality. It was something that if you talked about it, it was talked about in a very judgmental, condemning kind of way. When I turned that documentary off, I was 100% not homophobic. I mean, the switch was instant.
Wow. For me. Sounds like you were primed on some level, right?
Yeah, I think it was just like, my soul was like, okay, if you're 30 and you're still in this shit, like you're going to watch this documentary one day and it's going to open your eyes. And I had my husband come home. He came home from the church that afternoon, and we put the kids to bed, and I was like, you've got to watch this documentary. And he was like, ugh, I don't want to watch that. I already know what I believe about that. And I was like, no, please. So he did, and he had the same experience. And we looked at each other and we were like, okay, if what we were taught about homosexuality was wrong, I wonder what else we've been taught that was
okay. There's a crack in the armor there, huh? It's like, hey, if one thing was wrong, then maybe other things too, huh?
Yeah, there was a crack. And it, for about 2 years, we were pretty intensely doing what I didn't have this word in my vocabulary then, but I have it in my vocabulary now. For about 2 years, we were pretty intensely deconstructing our faith and just kind of taking the threads of that knot and pulling them apart one at a time, questioning each one, realizing that it didn't have as much weight as we thought that it did, and also realizing that we had a choice to unplug from that. And so by like 2016, I would say we were fully deconstructed and deconverted from evangelical Christianity. And our marriage went through hell over it. We don't know anyone who's gone through the process of growing up the way we grew up, getting married, raising a family in that environment as well, and then leaving it and still staying together.
Yeah, because I've heard stories of people leaving a husband or wife because my beliefs changed.
Totally.
So I guess it's kind of lucky your beliefs changed together.
Yeah, we went through the process together, and it was insanely hard, but also I'm so glad we did. And all the freedom that I was promised in Christ back in Christianity, I now feel I have. And it's not Christ and the Bible and the church running the show anymore. It's me connected to my body, connected to my intuition, practicing awareness, regulating my nervous system. Like that's what's brought me freedom.
And just to give us some technicalities, did you study something at that point? Did you do somatic experiencing? Like, what was the kind of trauma?
Okay, so yeah, in 2018, that's kind of when my life basically fell apart. So I had all this shit from childhood that I hadn't dealt with. My husband and I had just been through this massive transition in our faith, which rocked us to the core. We had moved from Texas to Minnesota. So we were also experiencing this sort of like geographical, cultural shock. And it was like the perfect storm for me to sort of just like fall apart. And I started having really severe anxiety and panic attacks in the end of 2018. That ended up with me like basically being bedridden for about 5 months, like not sleeping, panicking all the time, anxious, losing weight really, really rapidly, despite the fact that I was still eating all the time. I was so hungry. I just kept eating, but I kept losing weight. And on March 7th, 2019, I actually attempted suicide and was unsuccessful, obviously. Checked myself into the psychiatric hospital, stayed there voluntarily for 5 days. I knew I wasn't coming out without psych meds. At that point, I was like, I will take anything. Just like give me something to turn this off. And then whenever I checked myself out, I promised myself like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to figure out what got me to this place and I'm going to heal it. And so that's when I started excavating stuff, somatic stuff, learning about the nervous system, learning about brain inflammation.
Any particular teachers who were influential? Like, I mean, it sounds like you've been on a journey. So.
I mean, so many. Pete Walker's book, Complex PTSD, is like, it's like my Bible now, honestly. The Body Keeps the Score was another one that was extremely helpful for me. Learning about brain inflammation was a whole new concept. And I learned
about that.
Yeah, I learned about that from a man named Dr. Patrick Nemechek. He has a book called The Nemechek Protocol, which I still use.
Just in brief, what is it? Brain inflammation.
Yeah, so he talks about like whenever we experience trauma, and trauma, in the words of Black activist and somatic abolitionist Resmaa Menakem, trauma is anything that's too much, too fast, too soon. And so when we experience that, whether it's a divorce, being bullied at school, the loss of a loved one, a chronic illness, complex PTSD, just growing up in a really like traumatic, confusing, dysregulating environment, a concussion, like anything like that causes brain injury. And like when our brains are able to repair normally, we have like microglia, which are these soothing anti-inflammatory cells in our brains that help with neuronal pruning and help to soothe the inflammation in our brain. Well, after we have a concussion or some other trauma, meaning there is such a thing as emotional traumatic brain injury. It's not just you hit yourself on the head, you get a concussion, that's the traumatic brain injury. There is science supporting emotional traumatic brain injury as well. And so those emotional brain injuries can have the same effects as a physical brain injury. And you can look at the brain scan of someone who has a concussion and someone with emotional traumatic brain injury, and they look the same.
Actually, there's a physiology there. And that quote, by the way, just to be accurate to listeners, I'm pretty sure it predates Resmaa, unless you know that for a fact. Like in terms of...
I never read it before. That's where I first read Too Much Too Fast Too Soon. But if it does,
quote. If it is from him, credit. But I'm pretty sure it's older than his work. Could be wrong.
Yeah, totally.
Worth chat. I just don't like to put out kind of stuff that's I'm not 100% sure about.
Yeah, if it predates Resmaa, I don't know. Apologies if the original quote is from someone else. But yeah, so and then Dr. Nemechek talks about the way that brain inflammation affects the autonomic nervous system. And so it's like you have this trickle down effect where the brain is inflamed. And so like the limbic system is more active. So cortisol is higher, adrenaline is higher. The autonomic nervous system is getting stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. It's either mobilized chronically or immobilized chronically. And then that just sort of like puts you in this loop of always feeling shitty and having chronic and mysterious health symptoms come up, everything from like gut stuff to chronic pain to anxiety, depression, insomnia, sleep issues, like stuff like that. And so I started implementing his protocol, and it took me about 7 months of doing it before I really started to feel a difference. But I am 100% convinced that doing the top-down work of really working on healing my brain, plus the somatic bottom-up work of nervous system work, that combination for me is like the sweet spot. And it enabled me to get off psychiatric medications. I'm sleeping again on my own. And then started this work because I was like, holy shit, like this is revolutionary in my life. And I actually didn't even intend to like start this work before I started it. I was a food blogger, if you can believe that. Like I had a food blog and I took photos of food and I made healthy recipes. And part of that was because I was on what I now call the hamster wheel of wellness, where I was like always chasing symptoms with supplements and trying to change my diet to blame gluten or blame dairy or blame sugar, you know, all that kind of stuff. And really what I now understand is that I was never going to out supplement or out diet the way that my brain and nervous system were responding to real and perceived threats.
So people are rewired in a way by trauma in this way where they're stuck in a kind of fight or flight mode, right?
Or immobilized freeze. Yeah. For sure. Mm-hmm.
And that's unhealthy. So if they're stuck in fight or flight, let's just take, I don't know, the digestive system, as you started there, they're going to be maybe having diarrhea or stomach complaints. If it's the freeze, it might be the opposite, the constipation or the different dietary complaints. And you can go, yeah, maybe I'll go gluten-free and that might help to some extent, right? Or lactose-free or whatever. But there's something more fundamental going on in this case in the digestive system.
Yeah. And what I was a health coach whenever I had a food blog. And what I found with my health coaching clients was that very thing of like, I have these digestive complaints. Okay. So the logical explanation for that is I must be eating something that I shouldn't be eating. So let's now start trying to throw spaghetti on the wall and hope that something sticks by removing different foods from the diet or trying probiotics or other supplements to like help heal the leaky gut or whatever. And I don't discount the gut-brain connection. Like we do have an enteric nervous system that is in our stomachs. Our vagus nerve is innervated all throughout the gut. So I don't discount that. But I just feel like in health and wellness world, there's way too much focus placed on the gut and nobody's talking about the brain. And I like had to divest from the food blogging world that has or the health food blogging world that places all this emphasis on dietary restriction, finding the right supplements. Oh, you must not have found the right strain of probiotics, or you're not taking the right brand of supplements, or you should be steaming your spinach before you eat it. You shouldn't eat it raw because it has oxalates. And I'm like, really? Like we're like shaming people about their spinach being raw and like telling them
that's the issue.
You know?
I kind of feel like if you're just cooking your spinach wrong, if that's, there's maybe something more fundamental going on. I mean, okay. I mean, sometimes today it seems like everything's trauma. There's so many potential, once the nervous system's dysregulated, there's so many things that can be impacted that. Sleep, diet, sex life, all these things. How does someone know if something's coming from trauma? Because it could be coming from an intolerance. It could be a genetic thing. It could be, do you know what I mean? It could be a bunch of stuff. So like, particularly if people have got these like mysterious symptoms, something like, I don't know, chronic tiredness or something like that. It could come from many causes. Like, what would be the red flag of like, hey, you might want to look at trauma as a cause there?
I think that's a really good question. And I think that there's not a simple answer to it. I think the answer is complex. And so like the world that I come from is that I was on this hamster wheel of wellness, throwing diet stuff and supplements and all these kinds of things to try to fix myself. And I wasn't getting anywhere. And like, maybe I would experience temporary relief, but then I would have a new symptom come up. And so I was like always ping-ponging around like, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's my thyroid, maybe it's my hormones, maybe I'm in perimenopause, maybe it's like constantly trying to guess at what's wrong. And when I checked myself into the psych hospital, I was eating probably the healthiest that I've ever eaten in my life. I mean, I wasn't eating any grains. I wasn't eating any gluten, no dairy, no sugar. Super restricted diet. I was taking like $400 worth of supplements a month. I was doing the fucking medical medium celery juice, which is absolute utter bullshit. Like I was doing all these things and I was so sick. Yeah. And when I was in the psychiatric hospital, like hospital food is not healthy. And I was eating whatever and I wasn't getting worse. Like all
and
these
you
things.
See that here, like I'm in the Mediterranean, sorry to interrupt, but you do see that, like I meet these super healthy, well people, particularly in the Mediterranean, who are drinking coffee, maybe smoking cigarettes even, eating red meat every day with sugar, like in, they have these pastel de natas in Portugal, cakes and buns. They're doing, drinking wine, they're doing all this, but they're regulated, they have good social relationships, they move their bodies, they spend time in nature, all the stuff that we might recommend for regulation. And they're healthy, even though they eat just like a diet, which any nutritionist is going to say, what are you, insane?
Right. Yeah. So I think to answer your original question of like, how would somebody know it's trauma, is like, if you're experiencing those chronic and mysterious symptoms and you've tried all of the diet and supplement stuff and that's still not working, then you haven't gotten to the root cause yet. And,
there's an elimination piece there, right?
Sure. And and it's not like, I'm not like, I talk against restrictive dieting and protocols and spending tons of money on supplements, trying to fix shit all the time. It's not that I don't think that supporting ourselves, like by eating well and moving our bodies and being in nature, isn't important. Of course that's important. But by the time somebody comes to work with me, they've already been doing all of those things and they're still not getting better. And so that tells me like, okay, the problem is in the nervous system. It's not in your gut. It's not in your thyroid. It's not in your ovaries or whatever. Like the problem is in your nervous system. And it's because our autonomic nervous systems control everything that's automatic in our bodies. So every function that our bodies have that we don't have to think about in order for it to happen, our autonomic nervous system is in charge of that. When you look at people who are having these chronic and mysterious symptoms, they're always related to the automatic function of the body, the digestion and elimination, hormone production, detoxification.
And pretty broad usually, right, as well. So I guess that's another indicator. There's the elimination method, which totally makes sense. Like you've tried it, didn't work. And there's also something about like the breadth of symptoms, like when there's a genuine dietary thing, like, I don't know, my sister doesn't respond well to dairy. She was in Spain, didn't have dairy for 2 weeks. All of a sudden, her skin clears up.
Sure.
But that was it. It was real simple. It was really clear. And
it
wasn't everything in her life, because the nervous system is impacting so many areas.
Exactly. So maybe your skin clears up, but you still have anxiety, right? So then you're like, okay, clearly it wasn't dairy. And so I educate people on this to try to help them understand, because like I come from the paradigm of like throwing all of these things at it, trying to get better, and then not succeeding at that, and then feeling like a piece of shit about myself because there must be something wrong with me. I just haven't found the right insert thing here, And
I'm pissed off about this. Like you're heated about this. And I guess like it's like, I guess there's a lot of people cashing in on these kind of like celery juice diets and wellness industry. I mean, like what's pissing you off about it so much? I mean, it's just wrong.
I mean, it pisses me off because I don't think it offers people like sustainability. Mm-hmm. But like you can't sustain a life that is that precious. You know what I mean? Like
right.
I can't be in a house where there's any EMFs, and I can't have any gluten or dairy. I can't breathe air that, has like, if there's an air freshener in a restroom in a restaurant or something, like I can't even go in there because I'm going to have a reaction. Like I have to do dry skin brushing 3 times a day, or my lymphatic system doesn't detoxify. Like it's not sustainable. And it puts people in this position of like, sure, I validate that they don't feel good. I absolutely validate that their symptoms are real and they don't feel good, but they're actually activating their nervous systems even more by trying to micromanage and control the body and trying to out diet and out supplement the brain and the nervous system. That's what pisses me off about it. And supplement companies and, doctors are capitalizing off of people's desperation to want to feel better.
Desperation, and in some circles, a kind of neuroticism around it as well. If I have students that are like that, I pin them down and inject all their chakras with Coca-Cola. That's the solution. It just fixes it right there and then.
So, look, I just gave you this toxic thing and you didn't die.
I slipped some steak into their vegan lunch when they're not looking. Okay, so I'm a terrible, horrible man. So fad diets. Okay, nervous system health then. If someone said, hey, I think this is me, I've got some of these diffuse symptoms, I grew up in a cult or I had difficult things happen. I'm pretty sure that I'm wired like a ferret on, too much coffee. And like what's the plan, Batman? Like, what do we do? Because people always ask me for like the best modality, right?
Yeah,
like a concerned mother left me a WhatsApp note earlier today saying like, hey, what do I send my daughter to? EMDR or somatic experiencing? Like what's the nervous system healing realistic long-term plan you might put someone on?
Yeah, so I think we've got to get what's the modality out of our vocabulary. There's not a modality that works best for everyone. I certainly have done EMDR, had great experiences and a lot of relief from it for about a year, and then it just stopped working for me. So clearly that wasn't enough. I've done somatic experiencing, helpful, not the full picture. Embodiment is another one. It's certainly very helpful. What I'm feeling, if it had a dance or a movement, what would it be? And then do that thing. EFT tapping is one I'm learning right now. Insanely helpful. I think though, like the best place for people to start would be education about their nervous systems. And that's something that I really like.
Yep.
Is to empower people through education. And when I teach about the nervous system, I have a workshop that I teach every couple months called Nervous System 101. And I basically just like explain, here's like polyvagal theory in layman's terms. Here is what's happening in your body. Here's why what you think is your personality is really a set of adaptive behaviors that you've learned to survive. Here's why awareness and consciousness is important in this process. Here's why you have to work on your brain too. Here's why like lifestyle inflammation, which is a term I coined, is like a thing where it's like all these things in your life that like are contributing to your nervous system being dysregulated and being able to like change those things. So I always start with education. I educate all of my clients, like all of my students, they get this education because then once we have this education, we now have language to describe what we're experiencing in a non-judgmental way. So it's like, it's judgmental to be like, there's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm fucking anxious all the time. I'm never going to get better. Like that's pathologizing a normal human experience. Whereas having the language of the nervous system and going, I am feeling a combination of activation and immobilization. So that's that freeze state where the gas and the brakes are going at the same time. Like that's not judgmental. You can't argue with that because that's what physiologically is happening in the body. And where there's judgment, there's no curiosity. And without curiosity, there's no healing because
so education, moving away from judgment, more neutral language, more accurate language.
Yep.
And then what? Like a hell of a good start. Don't get me wrong.
And then what? So yeah, I mean, I do a lot of like anger work and grief work with clients. That's one of the ways that we go back and process memories from their childhood is with anger work and grief work. I incorporate parts work as well. Visualization, because the subconscious doesn't store things in words, it stores things in sensation and images. So there's a lot of visualization. I do not ever do mindset work and I do not do mantras and affirmations because you are never going to mantra your way out of a trauma response. Trying to tell yourself, I am safe, I am safe, I am safe, when you're clearly not safe is like lying to your nervous system and trying to bypass what's happening.
Yeah. So imagine what would happen if I did that with my friends in the Ukraine.
Right?
Yeah, I am safe.
Yeah, as the bombs are exploding in the background.
And even if someone is physically, literally safe, like if their nervous system is not set to safe, then it doesn't matter what you tell yourself. You can't talk your way out of it.
Absolutely not. Another really important piece is co-regulation. So we have these like mirror neurons in our brains that are neurocepting what people that in relationship are doing. And so we're responding based on their facial expression, tone of voice, inflection, body language, like all of that. And those neurons are perceiving this person is a threat or this person is safe. And so in co-regulation, if we can be with someone who is safe, our nervous system will respond automatically without us doing anything to the regulation of their nervous system. And we can come into regulation ourselves. And so many people, particularly since COVID, are really missing that co-regulation piece. Like COVID happened and suddenly people were isolated. They were out of community. They weren't hanging out with friends. And they were stuck alone, right? Like I'm alone in Mexico right now. I've been dysregulated because I haven't had a hug from someone in over.
Right. You haven't had the
support. I haven't had the like like sitting on a couch next to someone and just having a conversation that feels safe. So guess who's coming back to Mexico tomorrow? My husband, because I'm like, I can't do this by myself. So that's another piece that's missing, is that co-regulation piece. It is a 1,000,000% necessary. And I feel like COVID really robbed a lot of us of that.
Yeah, it was a huge crime. I think, unfortunately, the people making rules, which may or may not have been necessary, we could argue that one later. But what is unarguable is the people making those rules didn't understand the importance of co-regulation for child development, for mental health, for adult wellness. They just didn't have that in there.
No, they weren't trauma informed. We did not have trauma informed, nervous system informed people making decisions. And, you know, I understand the importance of having our prefrontal cortex where we can analyze and reason and we can make logical decisions. At the same time, our nervous systems and our limbic brains are not logical. And so that's where we need like people who do understand trauma and they do understand the language of the body versus just like logicking our way out of things. Because I personally think that we did more harm than good by shutting the world down in terms of child development. Like you were saying, mental wellness, people feeling alone, suicide rates skyrocketing, domestic violence skyrocketing during COVID, like all of that happening. Did we really save anyone? Like, really, did we?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very difficult equation to put things against each other when there's no numbers on one side and probably biased numbers on the other. You know, it's very difficult to make that equation. But I think what no one can argue with is like, okay, these are things that need to be considered.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think maybe it brings my hope, and maybe it's wishful thinking, is it brings a more mature conversation about social connection and social bonds. Because that has broken down in most of the developed world, right? Most of the Western world, Asia too. Has broken down. And I see like a world full of crazy people, just surrounded by crazy and isolated. And even the lifestyles we have, you know, I'm in an Airbnb. It's just me and my wife. We know one other person in this whole town. Yeah. I don't know my neighbors. We're only going to be here a couple of weeks before we move on. I mean, that digital nomad lifestyle is certainly crazy making for community and connection.
Yeah, I couldn't do it full time for sure. I've been in Mexico for 2 weeks now. 1 week with my husband, 1 week by myself. He'll be here tomorrow again because I was like, I don't want to go back to the tundra of Minnesota yet. I still want to stay in Mexico till the end of the year.
I was in Mexico 2 winters ago to break the back of a British winter as well. So I do a couple of months in the winter normally. That kind of which is going to mess me up more, the weather or the lack of my normal social bonds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely missing my community. You know, and I'm grateful for technology and things like Zoom and FaceTime and stuff like that. But at the same time, there really is no substitute for a physical body next to you that you can see, feel, touch, get a hug, breathe with someone. It's huge.
I just start hugging random little old ladies in the street, you know, when I'm traveling. It's just one of those things. I love it. And is there a risk that we could be like too trauma informed? So obviously in your life, you grew up in a place that was super disembodied, super untrauma informed, body shaming even. You know, I'm wondering if there's another extreme in the time I've been working with trauma. You know, I've kind of been trauma aware, I guess, for, I don't know, nearly 20 years, probably definitely for the last 10, kind of seriously. Like I've seen a huge growth in the awareness and I've seen it go into certain areas. Like, for example, I haven't had anyone talk about religious trauma before, but that totally makes sense what you said. I have had people on conferences talking about kind of racial or intergenerational trauma, but not always from different groups. Like the Russians didn't have much of a narrative about that, or the Ukrainians when I work with them. There just isn't a narrative of Slavic trauma, even though historically it's at least as bad as almost any other group in the world, right? But, you know, in the American narrative, they're just white people, so that doesn't count. Right. You know, but so we've got this weird trauma-informed world where it's kind of extremely strong in some areas, either geographically, like Northern California, or in terms of occupations, like, you know, therapists, yoga teachers now, maybe, didn't used to be the case. And in certain groupings of people, like most of my friends in the gay community, for example, are trauma-informed now. That didn't used to be the case. Sure. And then there's like, is there any risks to that? Because this is a whole new world.
Yeah, this is a sticky question for me. Like the first thing that's coming up for me is like, I don't think I don't think that it's bad to have education on trauma in the nervous system. Where I see that it's maybe, I hesitate to use this word, but I can't think of another one. Where I see that it's maybe being weaponized is in like wokeism.
Like, I have to feel safe, so you have to do what I want.
Exactly. Like, you have to violate your personal sovereignty and boundaries in order to make me feel safe. And I am a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person anymore, but I am a spiritual person. And I practice awareness and consciousness. And like, I know that I am not my body. Like, I have a soul. I have a higher self. This is my avatar that I've been given to take care of in this life. And this is where I'm experiencing human experiences. And this is where my intuition lives. But like, I am not my body. I am not my gender. I am not my race. I am not my sexuality. I am not any of those things. And I think that identity is important in so much as it shows us where inequality still exists. And we can make changes to improve that, to create more equality for people. I think beyond that is where it becomes harmful. And like, that's where we're like spinning in circles. You have to violate your own boundaries to make me feel safe. You have to affirm everything that I say that I am. And if you don't, you're abusive. Like, that to me is like where we've taken it way too far.
Right. So there's something here about over-identification, because, we're individuals. We're also groups, man, woman, whatever, this ethnicity, this nationality. And we're also something beyond that. So I see there's sort of three kind of ways we identify. And some, if I just identify the spiritual, I'm like, who the fuck am I? I'm spiritually bypassing. If I just identify as the individual, I'm missing the fact that, hey, I'm a guy, and that comes with certain advantages and disadvantages. There's a history to that. You as, I'm guessing a woman have a relation to that. But it's also like, I think we can over-identify with any of those three areas, right? Like individual, group, or spiritually. And all come with different problems, but there seems to be a leaning towards the group as an identification. The second one I feel is something like the extension of the definition of violence.
Yeah.
In that, like, I'm, working in Ukraine, for example, right? Like, trauma there, violence there, it's pretty fucking obvious. Yeah. And then we go, okay, but what about like someone being brainwashed as part of a religion? That's also not great. That's also, we told your body is shameful, things we talked about. That's not, being in a war, but it's just pretty bad. It's just going to have an impact. Yeah. And then what about if I just say a word you don't like? Right. Or if I won't acknowledge that you're not wearing glasses when you are wearing glasses in reality. But if you say it's part of my identity that you have to acknowledge that I'm not wearing glasses, and you're doing violence if I say that you're wearing glasses. And I'm like, yeah, but you're wearing glasses. So I'm not sure I want to participate.
Yeah. It's a mind fuck for sure. It is. And this is why I feel like our activism is, I even hate even the word harm is it's so blech to me now.
What does it mean?
What does it fucking mean anymore? Like, I'm doing harm because you want to be called unicorn self and I refuse to participate in your delusion? Really? That's harmful?
That's harm. I'm going to take all those people on a field trip right now to Ukraine. It's
right. So yeah, I think that if our activism is done from a place of dysregulation in our bodies, that's when we get into the spaces of we don't even know what the word abuse means anymore. Like, if you disagree,
devalue a word, right? If I say, hey, you've abused me by not acknowledging this thing or not saying this word or this, and that might be important. It might be something worth me learning, but is it the same word? If harm is, I made a Facebook post 2 years ago and someone got upset about it. Real example recently. And if that's harm, and someone might have been upset, maybe I was out of order, maybe I owe an apology, but it's if that's harm, what is a gang rape in Ukraine?
Right. I get this a lot where I post, I'm very authentic on Instagram. I will just blatantly say something and I don't sugarcoat shit. And I'm not doing it because I'm trying to be divisive. It's just, I value clear communication and I don't like to sugarcoat things. So sometimes when I make a post like that, I inevitably get a comment of your space is unsafe, unfollowing. And I'm it is not my fucking responsibility to create safety for 35,000 people who follow me on this account. You're a fucking adult. If you don't feel safe, unfollow. You know,
also you can't, right? Because if I'm offended by the fact you're wearing glasses and someone else is offended by the fact you're not, I mean, like, what do you do? Like, put them on and off?
Right. I'll just take them on. Yeah. I can't be all things to all people, you know, like my work has a resonance and it's going to resonate with some people and it's not going to resonate with others.
You've still got a little bit of Texan in you. You still got a little bit of that going on, huh?
I'm a little bit of a fireball for sure.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? And it's tricky because, you know, this isn't also an excuse for just being mean to people or not making some just general.
Oh, but I mean, most of us human beings are not shitheads. Like, really, most people they're good people. We have good intentions. We want to be kind. We want to treat people with respect. Yeah. And sometimes people are ignorant about certain things. And I don't say ignorant like they're stupid. I mean ignorant like they're not informed. Like they don't know. I just
don't know. Like I don't know much about fundamentalist religion, right? So I just don't know much about it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so inform people if that's what you need to do. But like, don't fucking say that like you're not safe. Like if you're children in abusive home environments are not safe. They don't have their fight flight responses are being activated and they don't have a choice. They can't fight back. They can't run away. They can't leave. They need their parents to survive. If you're an adult, you have access to that. If you need to protect yourself to get yourself to safety, that's what your nervous system activation is for. If you're choosing to override that and then shaming someone else and calling them a harmful abuser, that's your own responsibility. That's not my problem.
Sometimes I feel like some of the sort of more woke activism stuff is more about control and revenge. 100%. And I think it's now, if I was to be sympathetic, I'd say maybe it's a misguided healing strategy. Like when I get enough revenge, we could call that justice in inverted commas, but it's, you know, when I get enough revenge and when I control enough people and when enough people are scared of me in the way, because people are scared of the cancel culture mob. It's scary, you know, they come after you. When people are scared of me in the ways that I was scared, then I'll feel okay. And I don't see that as a successful healing strategy.
Yeah, it's like an eye for an eye thing. And it's, you're right.
Still got those Bible quotes, Lindsey. Still got those Bible quotes.
The conditioning runs deep, Mark.
Lindsey, this has been fun, if we can say such a thing about a podcast on trauma. We need to wrap up fairly soon. Where do people find you? Like, you've got a nice website, you've got an Instagram. Where do people go to look at your stuff?
Yeah, so I'm the host of the Holistic Trauma Healing Podcast, which people can listen to anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I also have an Instagram. I am Lindsey Lockett, and Lindsey is with an EY. So if you type in AY, you won't find me. And I work with one-on-one clients. I teach workshops on the nervous system and the freeze response. I do group programs. Like, I'm pretty easy to find.
I just Googled Lindsey Lockett trauma. I don't even know if I spelled it right, and the right website came up. And Perfect. There's a kind of 101 class on there that you mentioned, and the podcast and kind of all the other links. And I like your Instagram too. I think that's how I found you. It was just kind of like cool. It was common sense. It was helpful. It wasn't super sensitive or woke. It just felt like, okay, like I, read a little post and I go, yeah, I learned something, that's helpful. So
thank you. That means a lot. That means I'm doing something right. That's my intention. Lindsey,
I hope you get your hugs from your husband in Mexico and that all works out, and eat a burrito from me. And don't worry that it's not gluten-free. None of that matters. It's all bullshit. So
it's all made up and the points don't matter.
No, for some people, someone out there is going, I die if I have gluten, and there are those people. Listen, That's enough on gluten trauma. I've got vegan trauma. I've been traumatized by vegans. That's going to be my new book, Vegan Trauma. Okay, let's leave it there before I say something else that gets me cancelled. So, Lindsey, it was a total pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Mark. Nice to meet you as well. Thanks for having me.
Mark Walsh here. If you like that, you'll probably like embodimentunlimited.com and our app. So on both of these things, you can get a bunch of podcasts that aren't available here, some exclusive ones with some big names, some people you'll probably recognize that are over there. There's a copy of my book, PDF of my first book on embodiment, which seems that people like. I sold quite a few copies on Amazon, but there's a free copy there. What else is there? Loads of videos of me coaching embodiment, resources on trauma, on meditation, on yoga. And you can also chat to people without going on Facebook or any of that nonsense. So if you want to chat embodiment people, that's there. And it's on the embodimentunlimited.com, all free, and the app available at the App Store and all that good stuff. So